Grocery store on Rideau Street was the last place Lena Marsh expected her life to crack open. It was a Tuesday in late November, which in Ottawa means the kind of cold that gets into your bones before you've even unlocked your car. Lena had just finished a 12-hour shift at the Civic, a night that included 2 cardiac events, a teenager overdosing in the trauma bay, and a family she had to hold together with nothing but measured words and a steady hand while a surgeon delivered news no family should ever have to hear. Or she hadn't eaten since the granola bar she'd shoved into her mouth at 2 in the morning. Her scrub still smelled faintly of antiseptic. Her hair was half pulled out of the bun she'd pinned up 18 hours ago. Or she just needed eggs. Bread, maybe a container of that lentil soup from the deli counter that she could heat up without having to think. As she moved through the store quietly, the way nurses learn to move when they're running on empty. Efficiently, without drama, conserving every unit of energy that remained. She grabbed a basket at the entrance. She kept her head down. She did not make eye contact with anyone, not because she was rude, but because she had given everything she had to 31 strangers that night, and there was genuinely nothing left for small talk. In the produce section, squeezing a lemon without really knowing why she'd picked it up, when she heard the voice. "Excuse me, excuse me." The tone made the hair on her arms stand up even before she turned. There's a particular kind of voice, not necessarily loud, not necessarily cruel in any obvious way, that carries contempt in it the way certain clouds carry rain. You can feel it before it arrives. Turned. A man in his 50s, broad in the shoulders, wearing a dark wool coat that probably cost more than Lena's monthly car payment. He was looking at her the way people sometimes look at pigeons. Not angry, just deeply inconvenienced by her existence. "Blocking the display," he said. Lena looked down. Her basket was near the edge of the aisle. She stepped aside immediately, not because she was intimidated, but because she was too tired for friction of any kind. "Sorry," she said. Or she thought that was the end of it. Or it wasn't. "You people," the man said loudly enough that a woman with a toddler 3 feet away looked up. "Always in the way, like you own the place." Lena stopped. Act slowly. "I'm sorry?" Play dumb. He gestured at her, at the whole of her, the scrubs, the tired eyes, the lemon still in her hand, coming in here looking like you just rolled out of bed. Have some self-respect. Produce section went quiet in that particular way. Public spaces go quiet when something has shifted. A teenager stocking the citrus display stopped and stared. The woman with the toddler held very still. Lena felt the familiar tightening in her chest, not quite anger, not quite humiliation, something that lives between the two and burns either way. She had been awake for over 19 hours. She had held a man's hand while he died at 4 in the morning, and then walked out and helped the next patient because that was the job. And now she was being talked to like this, in a grocery store, holding a lemon. "Work at the Civic," she said, keeping her voice very level. "I just finished a night shift." "Well, I don't care where you work," the man said. "I'm telling you how you're presenting yourself in public. Some of us have standards. And there are moments in a person's life when the right response is silence. Not because silence is weakness, but because the human being in front of you is so far beyond reach that words are simply the wrong tool." Lena had learned this at work. She'd learned it with combative families, with patients in pain who said things they didn't mean, with the occasional person who needed to feel powerful and had chosen her as the nearest available target. Or she knew how to absorb impact without letting it show. Put the lemon down carefully. She picked up her basket. "Good morning," she said quietly, and she turned to walk away. "Right," the man said behind her, louder now. "Walk away. Typical." Walking. Her face was completely composed. Inside, she was shaking. Moved toward the bread aisle. She focused on her breathing. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. The same rhythm she used when she was standing at a bedside and things were going badly, and she needed to remain the steadiest person in the room. She was not going to cry in a grocery store. She was not going to give this man, this stranger in a wool coat, anything more than he had already taken. She found the bread, whole wheat, sliced, the kind she liked. She put it in her basket without looking at the price. Well, she didn't notice the man in the green canvas jacket until he was beside her. Well, he was tall, the kind of tall that registers before you've consciously looked up. He moved quietly, the way men move when they've been trained to control exactly how much space they occupy. He had a beard that was a few weeks past neat, and dark eyes, and he was holding a box of granola bars in one hand like he'd grabbed it off a shelf and forgotten about it. He wasn't looking at the bread. He was looking at her. "Okay?" he said. His voice was low and even, not intrusive, just present. Lena looked up at him. She was very tired and very raw, and she almost said fine the way you say it when you mean nothing of the sort. But something in his steadiness made her stop. "Particularly," she said. He nodded, like this was a perfectly reasonable answer. "I heard what he said to you. First time someone said something like that." Lena said she didn't mean it as self-pity. It was just true. "I know," the man said. "That doesn't make it less wrong." Well, she studied him for a moment. There was something about the way he held himself, a quality of stillness that she associated with people who had spent time in situations where panic was not an option. She'd seen it in some of the older physicians. She'd seen it occasionally in patients who were veterans. "Military," she said, not a question. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but close to it. "JTF2, he said, retired." Lena knew enough Canadian military history to understand what that meant. Joint Task Force 2. Special operations. The kind of service you didn't talk about easily and didn't leave easily either. "Marsh," she said, RN. "Currently running on one granola bar and approximately no sleep." "Owen Carver," he said. And then, because he seemed to read people very accurately, "You don't have to be okay right now." Laughed, short and a little ragged, and was surprised to find that it helped. Word. They stood there in the bread aisle for a moment, this exhausted nurse and this quiet retired soldier, and it was not awkward. It was the particular ease of two people who have both been in rooms where things were serious and have stopped performing for the sake of social comfort. "Dog," Lena said. She'd noticed it when he turned. The leash looped around his wrist, attached to a Belgian Malinois, sitting with absolute precision beside his left leg. The dog had been so still she'd nearly missed him. "Ranger," Owen said. "He's retired too. We work together. A different kind of work now." Dog, Ranger, looked up at the sound of his name with an expression of calm intelligence that Lena found immediately compelling. He was wearing a vest. She looked closer. "Word, he's a service dog." Owen nodded once. "PTSD support, mine." He said it the way people say true things they've made peace with, directly, without drama, without apology. "We got certified together 2 years ago. He goes most places with me now." Lena crouched down to the dog's level without thinking, the reflex of someone who had always loved animals and whose work involved constant assessment of the living. "Can I?" "I'll tell you if he doesn't want it," Owen said. Ranger leaned into her hand the moment she extended it. She stayed there for a moment, hand on the dog's warm neck, and felt something in her chest unknot just slightly. "Remarkable," she said. Owen agreed. There was real feeling in it. Well, she stood back up. The morning light was coming through the store's high windows, thin and pale and very Canadian, the kind of light that promises more cold, but also, eventually, morning. She was aware suddenly of how hungry she was, and how much she needed to sleep, and also, strangely, that she was glad she had come to this store on this particular Tuesday. They walked toward the checkout together, not by any explicit agreement, but simply because they were both going that direction. Ranger moved with them, smooth and silent, never pulling. "Do you work at the Civic often?" Owen asked. "Been there 6 years, Lena said, ICU. Looked at her with something she recognized as genuine respect. Not the performed kind, not the thank you for your service kind that sometimes felt more like a way of ending a conversation than starting one. Real respect. The kind that comes from knowing what hard work actually looks like. "Well, 6 years in the ICU, he said. That's not nothing." "It's a lot of somethings," she said. "Some of them quite heavy." Mild then, a real one. And she noticed it changed the whole character of his face. Back out, the man in the wool coat was 3 lanes over. Lena was aware of him the way you're aware of a low-grade sound you'd rather not hear. She didn't look at him directly. Owen did. He didn't say anything. He didn't make a gesture or a scene. He simply stood. All of him, 6'2" and 20-some years of operational training, beside Lena at the register, with Ranger sitting precisely at his heel, and he was completely quiet and completely present. The man in the wool coat looked over, registered Owen, registered the dog, looked away very quickly and did not look back. Lena paid for her groceries. She was aware that something had shifted in the air without a single word being spoken. Walked out into the November cold together. The sky was the flat gray of a Canadian winter morning, trying to decide if it had the energy to snow. Lena pulled her jacket tighter. Ranger walked between them. "Thank you," she said when they reached the parking lot. She meant it. All of it. The checking in, the standing beside her, the quiet presence that had made the man in the wool coat recalibrate without anyone having to perform anything. "Well, you didn't need me to do anything," Owen said. "You handled it. I just didn't want you to have to do it alone." She looked at him. There was something very honest in that, something she found she didn't have a smooth response to. So she just said, "That meant something." Then, "Can I ask you something?" "Well, sure." Do you actually know how to cook lentil soup, or were you going to buy it from the deli counter?" Laughed, a real one this time, unguarded, the kind that surprised her. "Deli counter," she admitted, every single time. "I make a decent one," he said, "from scratch." My grandmother's recipe, she was from Cape Breton, took her soup very seriously. Lena looked at him. Outside the fluorescent bubble of the store, in the gray morning light, he looked both younger and more tired than she'd first thought. The same combination she suspected, that she herself projected. "Well, is this you asking if I want to have soup with you sometime?" she said. "Liz," he said, "I'm out of practice at this, so I'm being very direct." "Appreciate direct," she said. "I work in the ICU. I have a deep professional commitment to clarity." He took out his phone. She gave him her number. It was not a complicated exchange, but it felt in the particular exhaustion and rawness of that morning like something important. Ranger sat on the cold asphalt and looked between them with what Lena could only describe as patient approval. She drove home through the gray Ottawa morning, thinking about how strange life was, how a night full of the worst kind of weight could tip over into something like this in a fluorescent-lit grocery store, between a nurse with no sleep and a soldier with a remarkable dog and a grandmother's recipe for lentil soup. Or she made it home. She ate the deli soup, standing over the sink, because she was too tired to sit. She fell asleep before she'd finished it. Well, she woke up 4 hours later to a text from a number she'd just saved. "Offer stands, snow pressure, Owen." Then, a minute later, Ranger wanted me to add that he thought you had good instincts. Or, she sat on the edge of her bed in the pale afternoon light, still in her scrubs, and she smiled at her phone like someone who hadn't been sure 3 hours ago that the day had anything left to offer. Back. "Tell Ranger his instincts are also excellent, and yes to soup." She set the phone on her nightstand and lay back down. Through the window, the Ottawa sky had finally made up its mind. It was snowing. Lightly, steadily, the way the best things in Canada tend to happen. Without fanfare, without announcement. Just there, suddenly and quietly beautiful. She closed her eyes. She thought about the man in the wool coat, and how little space he took up in her mind now. She thought about the way Owen had simply stood beside her, not to rescue her, not to perform anything, just to make sure she wasn't alone in a moment that tried to be smaller than she was. She thought about Ranger's warm weight against her hand and the ease with which the dog had offered comfort without requiring anything in return. She had gone into nursing because she believed, deeply and without irony, that the most important thing one human being could do for another was to be present in the hard moments. To show up, to stay, to not look away. She had spent 6 years doing that for strangers in the worst hours of their lives. It had not occurred to her until that November morning in a grocery store on Rideau Street that someone might do it for her. She slept well for the first time in weeks. 2 days later, Owen texted again, this time with a photo, a pot of soup on a stovetop, steam rising, a worn wooden spoon resting against the side, Cape Breton style, he'd written. Takes about 2 hours. Worth it. Lena was between patients when the photo came through. She stood in the hallway of the ICU, in the controlled, careful rhythm of the ward, and looked at it for a moment longer than necessary. Old. I'm off Saturday. Lied in under a minute. Saturday works. Pocketed her phone and went back to her patients, back to the monitors and the careful calibrations, and the art of being steadily, reliably present. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. But something about the last 48 hours had shifted something in her, loosened something that had been held too tight for too long. But you spend enough time being the person who shows up for others that you can forget you're allowed to let someone show up for you. You can mistake self-sufficiency for strength and loneliness for professionalism, and the line between the two gets blurry in the particular way that lines get blurry when you're very tired and very good at your job, and you haven't let your guard down in longer than you can exactly remember. Well, the Saturday arrived cold and clear, one of those Ottawa winter days that comes out crystalline. The sky a sharp blue above the snow, the city quiet in the particular way it gets when the cold is serious enough to make people reconsider outdoor ambitions. Owen lived in a house in Westboro, a small one with a covered porch and a pair of boots by the door, and the kind of lived-in quality that felt real rather than arranged. Ranger met her at the door. She crouched down and let him sniff her hands, and he accepted her presence with the same calm intelligence he'd offered in the grocery store, which felt, absurdly, like a vote she was glad to have received. The soup was extraordinary. They ate it at a small kitchen table with mismatched chairs, and Owen's grandmother's recipe card propped up against the salt shaker. Actual handwriting, faded blue ink, a small coffee stain in the corner. He told her about Cape Breton, and she told him about growing up in Kingston, and they talked about the particular texture of Canadian winters and what it costs to do work that lives in the hardest parts of human experience, and how you carry it, and what you do when carrying it gets heavy. We talked for 4 hours. Ranger slept beside the radiator, one ear occasionally lifted at a sound outside, then folded back down. When Lena left that evening, Owen walked her to her car. The temperature had dropped another 4 degrees. Her breath was visible. The street was quiet. "Glad you needed eggs that morning," he said. Looked at him. "I'm glad you needed granola bars." Smiled. The same one as before. The real one, the one that changed his whole face. She drove home through the Westboro streets, through the blue dark of a Canadian Saturday evening, and she thought about how the worst moments sometimes open into the best ones if you stay in them long enough. How a man in a wool coat had tried to make her feel small in a grocery store and had failed entirely because someone else had been standing in the bread aisle. How a dog named Ranger had leaned into her hand. Woman can be an ICU nurse for 6 years and still be surprised by the way kindness lands when you're running on empty. She had been humiliated, or someone had tried. And it had not worked, not because she fought back, but because she had kept her dignity without anyone giving it to her. And because a quiet man with a remarkable dog had made sure she didn't have to stand in that moment alone. There are people in this world who will try to make you feel like less. And there are people who will stand beside you in a grocery store at 7 in the morning and say nothing except "I see you," and you are not less. Lena Marsh drove home through the Ottawa winter, and she knew, clearly and without complication, which kind of person she wanted in her life. Already knew which kind she was. I keep thinking about the lemon. The way Lena picked it up without really knowing why. Standing in the produce section at 7 in the morning after a night that would have broken a lot of people. That small, ordinary detail stays with me more than anything else in this story. There's something about the way certain people are built, not born, built, that makes them keep going even when the world decides, in that particular casual and devastating way it sometimes does, to be unkind. Lena didn't fight back in that grocery store. She didn't perform strength. She just held her ground quietly and walked away with her dignity fully intact, which is actually one of the hardest things a person can do when they're exhausted and raw, and someone is talking at them like they're nothing. That's not passivity. That's character. And character like that doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from years of choosing, over and over again, to do the hard thing with integrity instead of the easy thing with noise. 6 years in an ICU teaches you something about what actually matters and what doesn't. It teaches you to tell the difference between a person who deserves your energy and a person who's just burning it for sport. What I find striking is the way this story works as a kind of equation. The man in the wool coat saw a tired woman in scrubs and made an instant, confident judgment. He assumed that what he saw was the whole of what was there. That assumption, that particular failure of curiosity and decency, is what undid him entirely. Not dramatically, not publicly, just completely. He looked across a checkout lane and recalibrated in about 4 seconds flat without a word being spoken, and then he left. Whatever satisfaction he thought he'd had in that produce aisle was just gone. Owen didn't rescue Lena. I want to be clear about that, because I think it matters. She had already handled it. What he did was something quieter and in some ways more meaningful. He made sure she didn't have to stand in a hard moment alone. There's a real intelligence in knowing the difference between those two things. A lot of people would have swept in with noise and made the whole event about themselves. Owen understood that what Lena needed wasn't a champion. She needed a witness, one who could say, without saying anything, "I see you, and I'm not going anywhere." Ranger. I think about what it means that Owen, a man who had spent years in some of the most demanding operational environments this country asks of its people, had built his recovery around a dog and a grandmother's soup recipe and the slow, deliberate work of learning to ask for help. That takes a different kind of strength than the one we usually celebrate. It takes honesty. It takes the willingness to say, "I have been through something, and I need support, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise." 3 of them together, the exhausted nurse, the quiet soldier, the dog who leaned into a stranger's hand without hesitation, felt like a small argument for something I genuinely believe. That the people who hold the most together, publicly and without complaint, are often the ones most in need of someone simply showing up. And that showing up, done right, doesn't require grand gestures. Sometimes it's just standing in a bread aisle and asking, "Are you okay?" I think we underestimate how much that costs to offer, and how much it means to receive.